There's a pyramid in Egypt that almost nobody talks about. No massive crowds, no famous postcard, no line of tourists waiting for the perfect photograph. Just a battered mound of stone and sand sitting quietly in the desert. For years, structures like this were easy to overlook. From a distance, a collapsed Egyptian pyramid can look like nothing more than a natural hill, a pile of broken limestone slowly disappearing beneath the desert. But sometimes, what looks like a mound is actually the remains of something much more important. And in Egypt, that raises a disturbing question. What happens when a monument survives, but the identity of the person it was built for does not? We tend to think we know the pyramids of Egypt. Most people can immediately picture the three giants at Giza, Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure. They dominate photographs, documentaries, textbooks, and tourist brochures. But Giza is only a tiny part of the story. More than 100 ancient Egyptian pyramids have been identified, and many of them are nothing like the monuments people imagine. Some have collapsed almost completely. Some lost their smooth outer casing long ago. Others were damaged, robbed, quarried for stone, or gradually buried beneath the desert. And some are so poorly preserved that archaeologists have had to reconstruct their existence from fragments, foundations, and buried remains. That is what makes the pyramids around Saqqara so fascinating. Because beneath this seemingly empty desert are the remains of an enormous royal landscape. Temples, tombs, shafts, causeways, and pyramids built over thousands of years. And some of those monuments are still difficult to identify with certainty. South Saqqara is especially interesting. This is where archaeologists have investigated several small and badly preserved pyramids whose owners remain uncertain or whose identities have been debated. Some structures are known only from fragments. Others have been damaged so severely that their original appearance is difficult to reconstruct. And that creates a strange archaeological problem. The monument can survive, while the person behind it disappears. Imagine building something that takes years of planning, enormous quantities of stone, skilled craftsmen, workers, transport networks, and an entire royal administration to complete. Then imagine that thousands of years later, we can still find the monument, but we can't confidently say whose eternity it was designed to protect. That is not science fiction. It is a real problem archaeologists face with some ancient Egyptian monuments. And the deeper you look into Egyptian history, the stranger that problem becomes. Because the ancient Egyptians cared enormously about names. A person's name was more than a label. It was part of their identity. Their existence could be preserved through monuments, inscriptions, statues, prayers, and ritual. Which means that destroying someone's name could have consequences far beyond politics. Egyptian rulers sometimes removed the names and images of earlier kings from monuments. The most famous examples involve rulers such as Hatshepsut and Akhenaten, whose monuments and names were deliberately altered or erased after their deaths. But there is an important distinction here. Historians sometimes describe this kind of practice using the Latin phrase damnatio memoriae. The Egyptians themselves obviously did not use that Roman term, and historians debate exactly how much these acts were intended as a systematic attempt to erase someone from existence rather than political, religious, or dynastic reworking. Still, the basic idea is real. A ruler could be removed from the official visual record. A name could be hacked from a wall, a statue could be damaged, an image could be replaced. And once that happened, later generations could lose the connection between a monument and the person who originally commissioned it. Now imagine that happening to a pyramid. Not just a statue, not just a temple inscription, a royal monument built to last for eternity. If its owner's name disappeared, the pyramid could eventually become anonymous. And that is where the mystery begins. Because when archaeologists encounter a badly damaged pyramid whose original owner is uncertain, there are several possible explanations. Maybe the pyramid was never completed. Maybe the ruler died before construction finished. Maybe later kings abandoned the project. Maybe the monument was robbed and dismantled over thousands of years. Or maybe later generations deliberately altered it. The evidence has to be examined piece by piece. And this is where archaeology becomes much less dramatic than the movies, but much more interesting. A pile of broken stone doesn't automatically mean destruction. A sealed passage doesn't automatically mean a conspiracy, and missing inscriptions don't automatically mean someone was trying to erase a pharaoh. Archaeologists have to distinguish between what the evidence proves and what the evidence merely allows us to imagine. For example, many Egyptian pyramids were deliberately sealed after burials. That alone isn't suspicious. It was part of the function of a royal tomb, and abandoned or unfinished pyramids are not unusual either. A king could die before construction was completed. Political priorities could change, resources could be redirected toward a new ruler, and a monument could simply be left unfinished. Then the desert would begin doing what the desert does best. Slowly, silently, burying the evidence. Wind carries sand. Temperature changes crack stone. People reuse building material. Robbers disturb chambers. Later settlements grow around ancient sites, and century after century, a monument can lose its original shape. Eventually, something that once towered above the landscape can become little more than a low mound. That may be the simplest explanation for many forgotten Egyptian monuments. But sometimes the evidence leaves room for something more complicated. Because when inscriptions have clearly been damaged by human tools, archaeologists can sometimes distinguish deliberate alteration from ordinary weathering. Weathering tends to soften surfaces. Natural erosion gradually rounds edges. Human tools leave different marks. Chisels can create sharp grooves. Names can be deliberately removed. Images can be damaged in specific places. And when those patterns appear together, researchers can begin asking a much more interesting question. Was the monument simply forgotten? Or was somebody trying to change what future generations would remember? That question matters because Egyptian history contains genuine examples of royal erasure. Take Akhenaten. His religious revolution transformed Egyptian royal ideology. After his death, later rulers rejected much of his legacy. His monuments were dismantled. His name and images were removed from some official contexts, and material from his city was reused elsewhere. The same broader pattern of political memory appears in other periods of Egyptian history. So the idea of erasing a ruler is not fantasy. The difficult part is proving that it happened at a particular pyramid, and that is where we have to be careful. A mysterious pyramid is not automatically evidence of a murdered pharaoh. A missing name is not automatically evidence of a conspiracy. And an abandoned structure is not automatically a deliberately buried secret. Archaeology rarely gives us a single dramatic answer. Instead, it gives us fragments. A foundation here, a damaged inscription there, a piece of casing stone, a fragment of pottery, a burial chamber, a tool mark, a radiocarbon date from organic material. And sometimes, those fragments are enough to reconstruct a story, but sometimes they aren't. That uncertainty is actually what makes unidentified pyramids so fascinating, because somewhere beneath the broken limestone may be information that has survived for thousands of years. The name of the ruler, the purpose of the monument, the date of construction, the political circumstances surrounding it. Or perhaps nothing at all. Maybe the answer is much less dramatic. Maybe there was never a secret. Maybe a king died. The project stopped. The workers left. The monument was gradually dismantled, and the desert simply erased what remained. But there is another possibility. Perhaps a later dynasty intentionally removed the identity of the original ruler. Perhaps the monument was politically inconvenient. Perhaps the king had been condemned by those who came after him. Or perhaps the monument simply belonged to a period of Egyptian history so poorly documented that its owner was lost without anyone deliberately trying to erase him. And this is the part that makes the story so compelling. Thousands of years later, we are still trying to reconstruct the intentions of people who left us almost nothing but stone. A pyramid was designed to defeat time. Its builders expected the monument to survive long after their own lives were over. They built in stone because stone lasts. They carved names because names were supposed to preserve identity. They created tombs because eternity was the entire point. And yet, sometimes the stone survives, while the name disappears. That may be the real mystery behind Egypt's forgotten pyramids. Not that they were necessarily hidden by some ancient conspiracy, but that an entire civilization could build monuments intended to preserve memory forever. and still lose the people those monuments were created to remember. Today, archaeologists continue to investigate the lesser-known pyramid fields around Egypt. Every excavation can change what we know. A single inscription can identify a ruler. A previously unknown chamber can change the interpretation of an entire complex. A fragment of stone can connect an anonymous structure to a name that has been missing for thousands of years. And somewhere in the desert, there may still be monuments waiting for exactly that discovery. Maybe one of them belonged to a forgotten king. Maybe it belonged to a ruler whose reign lasted only a few years. Maybe its owner was never recorded clearly in the first place. Or maybe someone really did want the name erased. We don't know yet. And that's the difference between a good mystery and a proven archaeological discovery. The evidence has to come first. Because the most fascinating thing about ancient Egypt isn't that it gives us easy answers. It's that after 4,000 years, it still has questions. Questions buried beneath sand. Questions hidden inside broken stones. Questions written on walls whose names have been deliberately damaged. And perhaps, somewhere beneath one of those forgotten mounds, the missing piece of the story is still waiting to be found. What kind of ruler could become so forgotten that even the pyramid built for his eternity could no longer tell us who he was? Subscribe to Ancient New